Now we can speak to Antony Loewenstein, an independent journalist and author of the Palestine Laboratory. He was based in occupied East Jerusalem between 2016 and 2020. Anthony, good to see you. The Security Council has failed once again in calling for a comprehensive ceasefire in Gaza. But I want to be realistic with you here. Let's face it, even if they managed to slap the term ceasefire on a resolution, the odds of Israel playing by the rules are very slim, are they not? I mean, Israel has got a track record of conveniently sidestepping past UNSC resolutions. So what I'm trying to allude to here is that UNSC resolutions, with or without the term ceasefire, are not going to make any sort of impact when it comes to stopping the war, stopping Israel's attacks on Gaza, would it?
Sadly, no. The UN is not going to stop this war, and not because I wish that it could not, but as you rightly say, historically we've seen for literally decades Israel and frankly the US and frankly many Western states routinely ignore UN Security Council resolutions, whether it's to do with Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Gaza, the list goes on and on and on. And ultimately, I think the only thing that's going to stop the current carnage in Gaza is Biden, the US administration, essentially. And from what I'm hearing, there is a growing disconnect between what the Israeli government and the military is telling their own public within Israel. Let's not forget, on October 7, the mission was destroy Hamas, kill all Hamas leaders, and liberate Gaza from Hamas. Now, here we are 2 months plus on, and although I think it's conceivable that the vast bulk of Hamas's military infrastructure could well be destroyed in the months to come, it's almost impossible to destroy Hamas in Gaza. And that therefore presents a problem for the Israeli government and frankly the American government. Now, let's not forget Biden's facing re-election in a year, less than a year. The war in Ukraine has been a complete disaster, that almost certainly there'll be negotiations in 2024 between Russia and Ukraine. That's been a key signature of Biden. And here we are in Gaza with Israel, and almost certainly Hamas will not be fully defeated. So the US has a major problem on its hands, let alone, of course, the huge amounts of Palestinians that are being killed and injured as we speak.
If President Biden is the person who can actually stop this war, let me ask you, what would it take for him to do so?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways this is sadly a domestic political issue rather than a global one. What I mean by that is that Biden is facing re-election, as I said, in 11 months. Most polls at the moment suggest that Trump will win. This is including in swing states where the Republicans are doing much better than the Democrats. Now, I'm not saying that all the decisions that Biden makes are solely because of the 2024 election. They're not, but it's a key factor. I mean, this is really also an issue that what we've seen for years, and it's been so clear in the last 2+ months, is the Democratic Party, in some ways, internally, actually is quite split on this issue. There are huge amounts of Democrat supporters and voters in the US who are very, very angry at Israel and do not support what Israel's doing. But the Democrat donor class, principally very, very wealthy people who principally support Israel, Jewish, but not just Jewish, are 110% behind Israel. That is what is driving a lot of this, although not all of it. Biden, of course, has a long history of being very, very pro-Israel. So ultimately, what does it mean? It means that there needs to be, I fear, far more casualties in Gaza. But also, let's not ignore, where's the EU? Where are the Arab countries? I mean, yes, the Arab countries are at least expressing some disquiet, but let's be clear. In the last 2 months, not one Arab state has cut formal ties. Not one Arab state has actually seriously challenged what Israel is doing beyond rhetoric. We are so beyond the time of simply rhetoric now, after 20 to 25,000 Palestinians killed. Where are the Arab leaders? The Arab people's a different story. I'm talking about Arab leaders. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi, the list goes on. And it's pretty clear from what I'm hearing that, in fact, those Arab leaders are very keen to maintain close relations with Israel when this ends at some point. As I've said for years, they've been determined to build those relationships because they're desperate for Israeli surveillance and repressive technology, which they use against their own people. And there's no indication since October 7 that those Arab states are seriously turning against Israel at all. Like, where are they? They need to raise their voice and do far more than they're doing.
Interesting points there, Anthony. I want to expand on how do we bring about an end to this war. Of course, President Biden is an important player here, an important stakeholder. But what about the Israeli public? Do you think when Israeli public opinion begins to shift, that could possibly force Netanyahu to stop the war?
Potentially, yes, but it's sadly the reality that from my Israeli friends that I speak to who are very critical of what's going on, and they're sadly a tiny minority, the vast majority of Israeli Jews support what's going on. They either don't know what's happening in Gaza. I say that willfully they choose to look away. Much of the Israeli press does not report what's going on. Most Israelis are not going online to find out what's going on, don't care. I mean, you have, and viewers can find this very easily online, prominent Israeli commentators. I'm not talking about politicians, I'm talking about media figures, journalists, commentators, openly talking about mass ethnic cleansing, mass killing of Palestinians. And I'm not saying obviously every single Israeli thinks like that, they don't. But there is a real atmosphere within the Israeli public, as there has been for years towards Palestinians, that Palestinian lives are not treated as equal, which is why, as my Israeli and Palestinian friends have said for years, this will not end, this being the occupation, the war in Gaza, without outside pressure. If we wait for Israeli Jewish opposition, which does exist, but it's unbelievably small, this will go on forever. This needs to be outside pressure. And the sad reality is all the likely alternatives to Netanyahu when he does fall as Prime Minister, which will probably happen next year at some point, Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz, on the key issues that matter, the occupation, the West Bank, violence, there is virtually no difference between these leaders on the key issues. And that, I think, says a lot about how for decades the Israeli political elites have sad uniformity on the occupation.
Fascinating insight into the topic. Antony Loewenstein, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for talking to us here on TRT World. Really appreciate your taking out the time.
Thanks a lot.